Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, and it's a very exciting episode today, because today we are going to be discussing 1986's Album by the one and only Public Image Ltd. Before we get to that, though, a little bit of house cleaning. There is going to be this week's video. There will be next week's video, and then I have some work stuff I have to do. So there will be so this is a one-off. Next week will be a one-off, and then I will be doing some work stuff. And come December, if you are a fan of the longer form content that I do, December, all kind of basically up through the spring, is going to be nothing but long form content. So I have a lot planned. I don't want to give too much away. Suffice to say, if you're a fan of the long form stuff, December and January and February are going to be your months. So a lot planned, and so stay tuned for the future. Anyway, we are going to talk about this. Now, you might be asking, Rich, why start here with Public Image Ltd? You are, if you know me at all, you are such an obsessive about Public Image Ltd. From 1978 to 1983, aka when Keith Levene was in the band. And Keith Levene is such a big goddamn deal for you. Why are you talking about this period where he's no longer around? And in fact, John Lydon is the only existing member of the band. And the reason is because one thing I will give away is at some point in the winter, I will be doing the obsessive series of videos, and if you've seen some of my other stuff, you know what that means. I will be going very in-depth into the 77 to 83 oeuvre. That means the albums, that means the singles, all the remixes, all the bootlegs, all the reissues, extant live footage that's out there, television appearances, talking about interviews, you name it, it's going to get covered, as only I do. So that's why. I just simply did not have the time, and I was trying to think of 2 weeks worth of one-off albums I could do, and I was gearing up. The plane was on the runway to do an MC5 video, and then I think her name is Abigail made a near 3-hour full retrospective of the MC5, and it's had like something like 20,000 views in like 10 minutes. It's been wildly successful. And as much as I don't want to admit it, it's extremely well researched. Believe me, I'd love to slate her, trust me. But I haven't made my way through all of it. But like, it really kind of took the wind out of my sails. So yeah, there's, eventually I will do the MC5, but just not right now. So I didn't want to have my little plywood raft next to her gigantic cruise ship. So at some point I will float my little raft out into the waters, but now is not that time. So the band's previous album, so this would be their fourth album, 1984's This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get, posed the question, when is an album not an album? Because if you know the backstory of this, which I will be reviewing this at some point, but if you know the backstory of this, there was the Keith Levene Commercial Zone iteration release of this, bootleg, if you want to call it that, a release of dubious legality, shall we say. So that was his version of the record, and then there was John Lydon and Martin Atkins. I think they recorded this in England with basically some studio guys, and there's a lot of overlap with the songs, but there are a few songs that are exclusive to this album. But I've always felt that the truth of what Commercial Zone is / This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get lies somewhere in the middle. Somewhere between that release and this is what the fourth album, I dare say, should have been. I still like this for what it is. There are some tremendous moments on it, and some of the songs that don't bear direct relation to the Commercial Zone forebears, like Tie Me to the Length of That, are outstanding. So that was the question sort of posed by this album. What the follow-up posed album is, when is a band not a band? And so I will explain that a little bit in context. So this was recorded in the autumn of 1985 in New York. And if you think about the other first wave British punk bands of 1985, The Clash, that was just before this, was when The Clash put out Cut the Crap. Right around the time this was being recorded is when Cut the Crap came out. So think about that. Post Mick Jones, post Topper Headon, Cut the Crap era Clash. The Clash might have been on the busking tour at this point. I didn't look up the dates, but so that period of them, okay, and if you've ever seen the photos that they took around that time and all of that, the very bizarre interviews that Joe Strummer gave, all of that was going on. And right at the same time, The Damned had put out, so they were now, we're now post Brian James, post Captain Sensible, and The Damned had put out Phantasmagoria. And I know there's not really Cut the Crap apologists. That's not really a thing. There are Phantasmagoria apologists. And I don't mean to piss you off or offend you if you are one. Not my favorite era of The Damned. I'll just generously put it that way. Is it essentially a Dave Vanian solo album, kind of like a reboot of the entire idea of Dave Vanian, that just so happens to have Rat Scabies on drums? That's more of what I think of that album. There are things that I think are good on there. I like the Eloise single. That's fantastic. But, The Damned sort of weren't The Damned, and The Clash kind of aren't The Clash at this point, and Pill is sort of not Pill. So I will get into some of the saga of the making of this album. Now, Martin Atkins, post the release of This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get, Martin Atkins had told Lydon that he was going to be leaving the band, and but they had assembled a touring band, and they had a reasonable sort of alternative hit back when that was such a thing, with This Is Not a Love Song. So the band goes out on the road, and they had assembled Mark Schultz on guitar. Is it Jebby Bruni, I want to say, on keyboards and sometimes guitar. Brett Helm on bass, Atkins on drums, and obviously Lydon singing. And there is I had not seen it until recently, but there was from, I think it's November of, no, wrong. On this, and I actually have multiple versions of this DVD bootleg. Believe it or not, there were actually like reissues. This is What You Get DVD bootleg that I would have purchased in, I don't know, the 90s or something. Or I guess maybe the 2000s. But there are I actually have multiple versions of this because it's absurd. But there is a show from this band that was broadcast on television. It was something called Rock of the 80s, and it was November the 15th, 1984. So this is that band, and it's almost like a new wave. It looks like like extras in a John Hughes movie, and it's very sort of celebratory, and you know, the crowd's really into it, and sort of kids dressed up either as new wave kids or sort of in their punk rock outfits, and it's a very I don't know, sort of convivial evening. But the band, I never really had a great impression of the band from this performance. It's only a small handful of songs: Bad Life, Public Image, Low Life, and Bodies, and Annalisa. And but recently, from a few months later, from like 3 months later, there's a show, what I guess is a full show from the Nakano Sun Plaza Hall. I think that's the name of it, in Tokyo. And that show is shows the band in much finer form. Though what is interesting is, whether you know the backstory or not, you can totally tell that Martin Atkins has one foot out the door, because he just boom baps his way through the night. There, like, he's ready to roll. But the one thing about Mark Schultz and Jebby Bruni, that on certain songs, especially the This Is What You Want, Flowers of Romance stuff, they sound really good together and make a lot of sense. Brett Helm does a perfectly good job replicating Pete Jones and Wobble. I mean, obviously he doesn't have the sonic identity of either of those guys, but Bruni Schultz, you know, you listen to the more recent material and you think, wow, you know, they're pulling it off. What I will say, and I don't mean to slight them, but when they do the earlier Pill songs, and this is like an impossible sort of task, but they are, you know, Mark Schultz is not Keith Levine, not by a goddamn stretch. And neither is Jeb and Bruni. No offense to them, but they just aren't at that level. And then when they do a couple Sex Pistols songs, and they also are really not Steve Jones. Again, not to slight them, and it's an impossible, those are sort of impossible levels to live up to, but, you know, Lydon had the great good fortune of working with Steve Jones, who is an incredible rock and roll guitar player, and then he had the great good fortune of working with Keith Levine, not just a great guitar player, but a fucking brilliant musical thinker and conceptualist, like absolutely brilliant. So, and when the time comes in a few months from now, there will be a lot of discussion. Keith Levine is like one of my favorite musicians who ever lived. So I will be talking at great length about the man and the man's work within the context of Pill. So it feels like they're sort of slightly exposed in that sense. Fun fact, Brett Helm on bass, who again does a very good job, but Brett, the job was originally offered to a young Michael Flea Balzery, who rejected the. He apparently went off on a jam with Martin Atkins for like 20 minutes, and he claimed he didn't know that Keith Levine was out of the band at that point, so he had shown up on the off chance he might get to jam with Keith Levine. But he got offered the gig and then turned it down the next day because he wanted to focus on the Chili Peppers. So anyway, so that could have been Flea, which is really, really interesting to consider. So the band did the tour, and by the way, I will link to that show in Tokyo because it is just, there's some really interesting interview footage with Lydon. He notes that the only music he likes at that point, he does like some Japanese folk music, but that Iggy Pop and reggae are the only music that he is currently interested in. But it's also interesting to see how he is when faced with a non-confrontational audience, and how much he really enjoys playing to the crowd, and and it's a really earnest performance. It's not the sort of, there's not kind of the madcap energy of this show. It's a different energy. There's an appreciative exchange of energy, for lack of a better way of putting it. So, at any rate, they go back, I think, to California, and Bruni and Schultz and Lydon, because this is now the lineup of Pill. This is Lydon, wanted to have a stable lineup, and the lineup had been in incredible flux in 82, 83, and into 84. So, again, someday I will discuss the Live in Japan era, and all of that. But this was going to be a stable lineup. Now, what Bruni and Schultz didn't necessarily have in terms of being able to replicate or create their own spaces for where Keith Levine or Steve Jones had marked it for kind of infinity. What they did have is they had a songwriting ability, and they really, really merged incredibly well with Lydon as a songwriting team. So on the 2016 Super Deluxe edition of this album, there is a demos disc, and I had read about the demos for a few years. They had been talked about, and they are basically completed, or they are put up in full here and on this disc. Now, this 2016 reissue, by the way, appears to have gone the way of the dodo. There isn't even mention of the track listing of it on the Wikipedia page for this album. There's it came and went very quickly, so I don't know what the level of availability of this is. I didn't see it up on YouTube, so it might be out there. As we go along, I will be talking about the contents of it, so you can decide for yourselves if you'd like to check it out. But this is really, really, really interesting. If you are at all interested in Public Image Ltd, in the process, how Lydon writes songs. Lydon is not a formal songwriter in the sense that he sits at a piano or a guitar. Apparently, in 1976, Chrissie Hynde in 77, Chrissie Hynde attempted to teach John Lydon how to play guitar so he could start becoming something of an autonomous songwriter, and that came to an end when he was attacked in the furor following God Save the Queen, and a knife went through the sort of the webbing part of his hand. That kind of ended him as a guitar player, because he wasn't able to really make chords particularly. So anyway, what is interesting about Lydon is like Jella Biafra, like Tuli Kupferberg, he is able to create melodies and create kind of song ideas by just sort of singing or intoning. And what Bruni and Schultz do here is this is all basically drum machines, and then maybe a little bit of sparse guitar or some bass or some keyboards over the top. But this is really kind of interesting, because it's almost like back to the roots of Pill, of laying down a groove. As we all know, John famously does not really like songs that are too fast, as he's not really a fan of hardcore, and one of the reasons he was such a reggae enthusiast is that the notion that if music is at a slower pace, you have time to think about the ideas that are being presented to you, and you have time to sort of really get into the music itself in an easier way and really immerse yourself in it, and that he finds that is harder to do when everything is super fast tempos or just everything is just thrashers. Interesting. So this is kind of back to the roots of that, because it's sort of one musical form that just repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. And Lydon just kind of does his thing over the top of it. Some of the stuff on here is fully formed. Most of it's with alternate titles. But the one song on here that never went any further is Animal, and Animal is excellent, and I really wish something had been done with it at some point, because it is an excellent song. It could have been worked into a great B-side for this album, whatever. The other thing I will say is there are some instrumentals that flesh out the end of this, and one of them is called Ben-Hur, which is this completely absurd, what sounds like a Casio preset adventure that I don't know what Lydon's level of involvement in that was, but it is totally absurd, and I can't imagine what kind of song it would have been turned into, and it's so ridiculous that I find it very funny. But the other ones, especially Cats, that really could have become something. I'm surprised that Lydon didn't create melody and or lyric for it, because that's really, really, really cool. As is Have a Nice Day and Untitled number 3. But especially Cats and Have a Nice Day really could have become dynamic, interesting Pill songs. So they had the ability to generate material, and they were very prolific in a very short amount of time, and these are all really, really cool ideas. And some of the stuff John is just sort of improving, and some of it he already has a very, very solid idea of what he's doing. So he brings everybody to New York. Now, what had happened in the interim is John had struck up a friendship with hip-hop pioneer Africa Bambaataa. And Africa Bambaataa, I think made some of the most compelling and genius early hip-hop records. I think Looking for the Perfect Beat is like one of the best recordings of the 1980s. That thing is a goddamn masterpiece. I love all that stuff. I'm a really big fan. Like his song with James Brown is a bit of the truth, unity, love, and having fun. That song is amazing. So anyway, but with Bill Laswell producing, there was the sort of, I guess, ad hoc group Time Zone, and Bill Laswell plays bass on this. Bernie Worrell of Parliament Funkadelic plays synthesizer on this. And this is the song World Destruction. And so this is it late 84, early 85, I want to say? Late 84. And this is basically the first, I guess, what you could call rap rock crossover. I know that The Clash had Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five as an opening act when they performed at Bonds, but this is the first time you had a rock and roll person, Lydon probably would not want to be called a rock and roll person, but a hip-hop person and a punk person, we'll put it that way, actually together on the same record, not duetting, but both sharing the lead vocal space, and I would have to imagine to some degree the lyric writing, because some of the lyrics are very Bambaataa-ish, and some of the lyrics are definitely things that Lydon would have written. I don't know for certain on that, so if I'm wrong, please let me know. But Bill Laswell produced it, and as Lydon later said, it was a way for Laswell and Lydon to sort of feel each other out. And so anyway, fall of 85, they go back to New York, Bruni and Schultz in tow, and they're going to turn these songs into an album. Apparently the early sessions went terribly, and Lydon had to fire Bruni and Schultz. So the sessions just were not going well, not huge budgets, and the tough calls had to get made. So at that point, Bill Laswell, who, fancied himself, a production auteur, assembled a bunch of people kind of out of his cast of regulars, and some of whom are, musical legends and superstars, and very much in their own right. And what emerged in early 86 was finally this album. Now, the packaging we will talk about as well. The packaging of album is, and we will get into the musicians on this, trust me. But we will talk about the packaging now. For the second time on this channel, very wonderful, important, brilliant movie from the 80s, Repo Man. Alex Cox's Repo Man shows up. And Repo Man had the endless aisles, the endless Southern Californian aisles of generic goods. And Lydon took that and ran with it and made it a concept. Now, this is where things get a little controversial. Because if you saw my Nirvana video, you know I'm a big fan. This band will also be happening in the next few months. I can also give that away. It will be going down. Trust me on this one. But that is Flipper. Is this 82? I want to say this is from 82. I think it's 82. I always forget the exact release date. But Flipper had put out generic album Flipper. Now, what you have on this album is you have the austere, generic, quote-unquote, generic cover with the barcode, back before barcodes were really a thing. And then you have the lyric sheet that is sort of like a medical script, right? And then you have a fairly austere label, right? Kind of a just the facts label. So that is the packaging for Flipper. The idea being that John Lydon had stolen the idea from Flipper. Now, people who are defenders of Pill and defenders of John Lydon say that's a completely ridiculous claim. John Lydon would have had no idea who Flipper were. They were a San Francisco punk rock obscurity, and how would he know who they were? Well, there are photos of Johnny Rotten of him coming out of a record store with Flipper colleagues, Dead Kennedys. Is it the California? Or is it Too Drunk to Fuck? Either Too Drunk to Fuck or the California Uber Alice single. So he's holding the 45. It's obvious, like it is what it is. And so John Lydon knew about the Dead Kennedys. He knew about Black Flag, who he famously did not care for. I don't think it's a stretch to say that he knew about Flipper. The other thing, curiously, is in this 1984 performance, there are cutaways to John in the television studio, like in the booth, and he references the television show Flipper, the actual dolphin Flipper. Interesting. So months, roughly a year before he makes this album, he references Flipper the dolphin. Is that a subliminal? Who knows? I don't think it's outrageous to suggest that he knew who Flipper was. John paid attention to a lot of music. When people have sort of quizzed him on some of the like really obscure like English punk bands and stuff, like he knows all those people. Like John, I think like Bob Dylan, John really stays on top of stuff and knows more than people think that he does. And one of the things is, and he has opened up a little bit about this over the years, is he tends not to talk about influences that often, or he tends not to let on everything that he knows, partially because when he has done that, the press, and he has said this, but it's something I had seen anyway, just as somebody who pays attention to his work, if John references Can, all of a sudden early Pill is like a Can ripoff, like, or the Stooges, covering the Stooges No Fun, like the Sex Pistols were ripping off the Stooges or whatever. So I I get that he's a little bit cagey about talking about music that he likes or referencing things too much. I completely understand that. Because if I were him, I would get sick of that shit as well. So I don't think it's outrageous to suggest that he knew about Flipper. However, what I would say is that Flipper's sort of concept sort of ends with the album cover, and if you want to say the lyric sheet, you can say that. I posit that this has far more, to use the Frank Zappa phrase, conceptual continuity going through it, and is a larger unified statement than the Flipper album. The Flipper album is an absolute masterpiece, one of the greatest albums ever made. I will trust me. Flipper videos are coming in the next few months at some point. Trust me. And I think that they are one of the greatest bands that ever existed. But I just don't think that there's that much of a crossover between what they were doing and what he was doing. And if he did get the original idea from them, he certainly elaborated upon it and took it into a completely different space. This has nothing to do with the band Flipper. And the fact that he had sort of talked about that he had seen it in Repo Man, I think it probably does come from Repo Man. I'm willing to kind of give the benefit of the doubt. Now, the one final footnote of Flipper, though, which is, I think, hysterical, is Flipper, though, a year after album, put out their incredible live album, which I will, again, be talking about in great length at some point. But this is 1987's Public Flipper Limited, which is hysterical. That's funny. I love that. That Flipper always had a great sense of humor. They had a great sense of fucking everything. But Public Flipper Limited, le mot juste. Gorgeous. One thing I will say about this album before I sort of get into the track by track is this is the sort of the beginning of the period of Pill, the later 80s iteration of Pill that was omnipresent on 120 Minutes and Alternative Nation. And really, I think, became the prototype of what was known as pre-Nirvana, alternative rock or modern rock. And I think this record, Nelson George made the point about David Bowie's Let's Dance, that a lot of other English rock superstars or rock royalty tried to post Let's Dance, try to make a version of Let's Dance, and were really unsuccessful at it. I think that sonically, there's a lot of ideas in this album that, outside of having like a direct like dance influence, or like sort of like the acid house thing, or the Manchester dance thing, outside of that, this really sort of, I think, became the template for modern rock or alt rock for several years. None more so than this album, Bowie and Iggy, so the influence goes around. This, according to the Chris O'Leary book, this is Iggy's blah, blah, blah. The album was a primary influence on Bowie and Iggy in the making of this record, and this was sort of their attempt at recreating it in a way. Though I would argue, excuse me, there's some strong songs on here, but much, much, much less successfully. And part of that is down to the players and just the overall conceptualizing, and obviously we will get into that. But this was, this era of alternative rock, if you want to call it that. The other thing is, I think that as much as it is the template in a lot of ways for what a lot of their colleagues wound up doing, and a lot of the production sounds, a lot of the stuff that starts here, I think by 88, 89, you're getting like really bad, gloopy, overproduced versions of, and kind of pale imitations of this. And by the way, Iggy wound up working with Bill Laswell on his album after this, Instinct. But anyway, I think that, Nevermind sort of, blows away not just hair metal, but blew away a lot of the late period Susie and the Banshees or New Order or whatever. And what's funny, though, is if you really pay attention to this album sonically and what it achieves with the very sparse instrumental components, really, in a weird way, you could argue that what Andy Wallace was doing with the mix on Nevermind is actually the sort of apex of these ideas that are pioneered here. So I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, I don't know, but I feel like I don't necessarily think that that it's a day and night sort of thing with this era of alt rock, then into the Nirvana era or early '90s thing. I actually think that perhaps Nevermind was more of a transition than it was a setting of the new way of doing things. Because I think that a lot of that album's ideas sonically, not songwriting wise or instrumentation wise, but sonically, it's why I'm saying Andy Wallace specifically. I think a lot of it may very well come from this record. So I think this was a very, very influential album. And, there's little things that are influential with Public Image Ltd. As well. Who knows whether people picked up on it or not? I don't know. And maybe it's as potentially tenuous as the Flipper generic album to this is. But even like that Nakano Sun Plaza Hall show in Tokyo, like, they do an all drum version of Under the House. All the members of the band are playing a drum, which is what, just 2 years or a year and a half later, Jane's Addiction was doing on Chip Away. So, was Jane's Addiction influenced by Pill? Entirely possible. The other thing that happens in that show, and this one is maybe also a stretch, but Lydon is filming the crowd with a camcorder, which was at the time very cutting edge technology, and they cut in what Lydon is filming into the actual edit of the concert film. And so some people have made the comparison that was pre-Zoo TV. Now, who knows that? I think it's far easier of a jump from Pill to Jane's Addiction than it is Pill then 6 years later to Bono, but who knows? At any rate, it's funny to think about these things. But yeah, so I guess we will now get into the track by track. So the first song on here is FFF, extreme abbreviation for Farewell, Fairweather Friend. Is it about Martin Atkins? Is it about Keith Levine? Is it about Malcolm McLaren even? Steve and Paul? Does it even fucking matter? It is a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous song. First of all, what's interesting is, the first Public Image Ltd. song, Public Image, begins with John saying hello, right? Well, this begins with farewell. So that's an interesting, are those bookends, perhaps? Who knows? The thing about it sonically is this was called, in its time, a heavy metal record, or that John Lydon had Johnny Rotten goes metal. And so in the firing of Bruni and Schultz, Bill Laswell really, his idea apparently was to assemble a heavy metal band around John Lydon, but it's like the most avant-garde, abstract version of a heavy metal band possible. And I forget the other guitar player's name on here. We will talk about the main guitar player a lot but the other guitar player on here is Nicky Scopelitis. I don't really know anything about Nicky Scopelitis, so apologies, Mr. Scopelitis. So I get the sense that he's doing most of the rhythms and a lot of the the rhythm parts and a lot of the riffing, I would have to assume are his. And so one of the things about this album, when I talked about conceptual continuity, is it would be interesting, and I don't know if this was Bill Laswell's intention, but it would be interesting if they were in fact following the Quincy Jones Thriller model. So in the same way that they had Steve Lukather do the main guitar parts and then they brought in Eddie Van Halen, I wonder if they have Mr. Scopelitis laying down most of the parts, and then here we go, they bring in a flash guitar player to play leads over the top of that. Now, we might as well get to that. The flash guitar player in question is not Eddie Van Halen, but Steve Vai. Steve Vai, at this point in his life, was post Frank Zappa, but just a couple months out from working with David Lee Roth. So at this point, he was the guitar player in Alcatraz. What is Vai's and what is Scopelitis? What exactly the division of labor is on that, I'm not sure. Scopelitis plays on most of the songs. There's only 7 songs on this album. They're all fairly lengthy. But it is... So touching on what I was saying a moment ago, my first Public Image Ltd. purchase, and if you were a kid from my time, you saw this in, I feel like, again, like I said about the Doors' greatest hits, I feel like this was in every record store in America. There would always be like one copy of it, and that was the 1990 compilation, The Greatest Hits So Far. And so this had a couple of the earlier songs from Metal Box, but it really was a pretty fair summation of their singles across the board. So I didn't initially sort of really differentiate this period of Pill from the latter 80s Pill. What I refer to, and when I do my videos on this eventually, the what I call the polka dots and dreadlocks era. Don't steal that; it's mine. So I didn't really know that this album was such a specific one-off of an album. So I purchased this. I had gotten the earlier albums first. I had gone in roughly chronological order. My first one that I got was second edition. Is that here? Yeah. So the first thing I ever got was when I started buying the albums. This is after Greatest Hits So Far. But so when I started getting the albums, I was able to find a copy of second edition. One eagle-eyed viewer, David Stanton, noticed my copy of Metal Box here. I'm not going to pull that down because it'll just roll right off and be a bloody mess. But this is the double album version. So anyway, I went in fairly chronological order, and I remember I was slightly put off by the polka dots and dreadlocks era, and didn't really know what to make of it. And I kind of thought, oh, it's like later Susie or later New Order. I don't know if that's really for me. And but at some point in the later 90s, early 2000s, I just sort of had this brainstorm of, well, I should own every album that John Lydon has made. He's important enough and brilliant enough that I should have the lot. So fortunately, I don't know what happened, but the record store that I talked about in my John Lennon video that I've referenced a few times, Secondhand Tunes, they had This Is What You Want, this, Happy, I think Happy 9, Paris in the spring, or Paris au Printemps, or however you pronounce that, and the 83 Live in Japan. I want to say I got all of those in one day. So I made my way. I think I started with Happy and 9, and I kind of didn't really get those records. And again, I was lumping all of this together. And one day, this is the old apartment that I had way back when, and which was a terrible apartment and was infested with 2 kinds of insects. And I mean infested. It was really bad. You couldn't, in the morning you would wake up and you couldn't walk without at least one squish. It was really, really gnarly. But the one nice thing about it was my bedroom had these big windows up at the top where the wall met the ceiling, and it was all all trees and sky. It was lovely for listening because I had my stereo in there, so it was lovely to listen to music in there because you just had a nice big sort of glass vista to look out at. And I put this album on one day, and it just all of a sudden clicked. It just all of a sudden made sense. Further along, right around that time, because I obviously had this on vinyl, and at that point I still had a cassette deck in my car, which I had like the thing that the fake plastic cassette thing that you would put in that was wired to a CD player. This is my OG, very, very mangled copy of the plastic box set that actually had the PVC casing. That this got damaged in a move when I moved out of that apartment. This and a couple other CDs and records and books got really, really screwed up badly. So these are the sad remains of that. But the third disc of this set had replicated all of album with the song without the song Bags on it, and I had made a tape of that, and I would listen to the CD of it as well. Like I had made a mixtape, and I would have the CD going sometimes, and that like between blasting this out of my speakers and listening to the third disc of Plastic Box, this started to really, really click to me and really, really make a lot of sense. And I really started to like feel like I understood the actual brilliance of this record and like the actual genius of it. So farewell, fair weather friend has, so Bill Laswell is basically the drummer on the entire thing, and the drummer's Jesus Christ is basically the bass player on the entire thing. The drummer on this song is none other than Tony Williams, the amazing jazz drummer who played with a million different people, but primarily is in the second Miles Davis quintet. So all of those amazing albums in the middle into the late 60s, like the Pre-Bitches Brew stuff, like post Quiet Nights, Pre-Bitches Brew, that's all Tony Williams. That guy, that like unbelievable genius, is the drummer on this album, or on most of it. We'll get to that. And it's so cool and interesting to hear him playing just this like hard hitting straight rock beat, and it feels mechanized, but also somehow has a swing. The drum sound on this album is insane. I feel like it's a testament to the greatness of Bill Laswell, because I feel like a billion people tried to get this drum sound and it was all fucking shit. Like nobody could get it right. What he synthesized, what he put together at the power station sonically is like fucking ridiculous. This thing leaps out of the speakers. The remastered version of the album on in digital leaps out of the speakers. It is a phenomenal, ridiculously impressive widescreen production. And but the thing about this album is that and part of the conceptual continuity is there's no credits on it. So you have these like superstar genius musicians, all anonymous. All the song titles are minimal, like one-word song titles. It is generic. It is stark and sparse. And that goes through to the album itself. So you have Tony Williams, this guy who could play like literally like anything, and just playing these like Spartan, brutal, stripped all the way down rock beats. And then everything builds on top of that. So you've got like the phalanx of guitars, and you've got fucking Steve Vai, and apparently the way that they recorded Steve Vai was they just he did like 2 days, and then I think he did like a couple days later. So he was barely ever in the studio with them. They wouldn't really let him hear anything before having him record. And according to one story that Lydon told, Steve Vai, especially, because he was, first of all, he was really young, but then coming out of Zappa's band, didn't like drink. And I guess they got him a little tiddly before hitting record, and they wouldn't really let him work out parts beforehand. So a lot of this stuff is just him kind of improving, and what he comes up with is absolutely phenomenal and really, really cool. I mean, there's like a lot of like shred stuff. The other thing that's interesting is the selective multi-tracking that Laswell does with his guitar lines. Really, really, really cool, inventive, innovative stuff. And I'll get more into his playing sort of later. But the big star of the show, the big, the center of the thing is John himself. And what's also interesting is Tony Williams is stripped down. Steve Vai is not working out parts. But Lydon has really stripped down his lyrics. So I think the sort of the writerly standard of like Metal Box or even Flowers of Romance, like Flowers of Romance are like these really fully composed thoughts or impressions. This is very, very, very stripped back and skeletal and kind of Western haiku, and his lyrics are sparse as Tony Williams's drumming is, but what he does with it. So in the same way that Tony Williams manages to make it swing, in the same way that Vai manages to throw in some really cool parts and ideas, Lydon, gets some amazing lines in, like logic is lost in your cranial abattoir. He rhymes your and abattoir. Like, that's awesome. That's fucking great. And then, like, the beautiful, subtle wordplay of used to be nice, now you're twice as nice. Used to be good, now you're too good. I love that. Like, it's just, speaking of David Lee Roth, it's like the line in when he was asked about the line, Little Girl from Cherry Lawn and Hot for Teacher. And they're like, how did you think to choose Cherry Lawn? Like that one little detail. And Roth, and I love this, Roth said, you just throw a little salt in the rice, not too much. It's such a great line. And I feel like that's what, in a weird way, that's sort of what Lydon is doing here. And it's funny that Vai was just a stone's throw away from joining up with David Lee Roth. But it's a big, powerful, thudding performance. I guess you could call it heavy metal. It's almost like, I don't know. It's almost like punk cubed. It is its own thing. It is its own weird mutant version of high concept rock music. And funnily enough, Lydon was, especially going back to the Sex Pistols and the fact that they did that, that McLaren put out a fake documentary about them, the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, and there was always a lot of piss taking and joking around and like weird humor, and sometimes just outright making things up. And they created some of their own chaos, and then there was the chaos from the reaction to them, all of, so it's kind of, it's hard to parse out the truth about them in a lot of ways, and there's myths about them that still persist, some virulent and grotesque, some just people being misinformed dumbasses who don't care to pay attention. But one of the things that when I was, and I should mention the fodderstomp.com website, a lot of my source info on Pill, especially in the 2000s, came from them. The site still exists. It hasn't been updated since 2016, but I really, 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 really recommend anybody who's interested in Pill. Those people who ran that site did exemplary, unbelievable work. It is easily the greatest fan site of a band ever. It is just a labyrinth of resources and information about them. They did shocking, incredibly great work. But they had collected a lot of reviews from contemporary reviews, and they referred to this album. It was the first time I remember, it would have been like '02 or something when I would have, they referred to, a critic had referred to this as meta pop or meta rock. I had never heard of meta anything before at this time, before meta comedy or whatever. So, or meta commentary on things. And there's a lot of people acting as if everything with Lydon is mind games and that it's all that it's all somehow strategic parody and these carefully considered sort of elaborate jokes at the expense of the audience or whatever. And this is very high concept with, again, lack of credits, that this is sparse, the music is sparse, the lyrics are sparse, it's all anonymous, they're playing off this generic idea, etc., 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 etc. But what that ignores is the actual reality. And the actual reality is what is at the center, and that is John Lydon. Now, if you've ever been lucky enough to see this is the classic albums, making of Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. It is on Tubi for free, so you can go find this. It's all over YouTube. People have cut this up and put it all over YouTube. It's easy to find. It's, I think, the best classic albums that they ever made, maybe other than Electric Ladyland. That one's amazing. But there is footage of John recording the vocals to God Save the Queen in the studio. And if you can look at that guy and think that this is all some sort of elaborate joke at your expense, then you really don't understand. And you really aren't paying attention. I saw Public Image Ltd. Play in 2010, and I was 2 people back from the stage. And I watched that man sing, and he absolutely sang his fucking heart out. He wept during Death Disco. He might have also wept during Time He Did the Length of that as well, perhaps. I think he means every fucking word. And all of this, this would just be bullshit fucking late 80s or 80s sophistopop. This would just be jerk-off stuff. If it wasn't for the fact that the furnace, the fire in the furnace at the center of everything, giving life to it, is John Lydon, and the intensity and sincerity of his vocal performance. And all of this stuff, I mean, they called one of their later box sets Songs from the Heart, and I think that that's being very serious. It is Songs from the Heart. If you've seen the real Sex Pistols documentary, The Filth and the Fury, where he breaks down talking about when Sid Vicious died, like, I think that the real guy, the emotional core, is very serious stuff. It's very, very honest stuff, and that's what the hurt and sense of betrayal and sense of frustration in the first song is all that's to paraphrase the Rene Ricard line from Basquiat, and I think I've used this one before, you are looking at Van Gogh's ear. This isn't some test of your intelligence. It's not bullshit. It's real stuff. It's right there. It is as clear as blood on snow. So anyway, the other thing, 2 other things about that song, is Laswell's treatment of Lydon's vocals. It is the best vocal treatment he's gotten since, speaking of Nevermind the Bollocks, since Chris Thomas and Bill Price. And they figured out different miking techniques and stuff and different ways of multi-tracking him. They knew exactly what to do with him. They figured it out, just like they did with Steve Jones's guitar sound. Anyway, Bill Laswell does amazing, vivid, multi-tracking, and the last 30 seconds or whatever the song is some beautiful under the house-esque sort of backmasking of John's voice. He's like he's sort of an oral bat in the belfry, and just that Tony Williams thundering fucking beat. And it comes to, and it's so overwhelming, and the sound is so big, and then it just hard goes into, it goes straight into the song Rise. Now, chances are you are familiar with that song. It's one of their most famous songs, as well it goddamn should be. But the hard cut from the end of FFF into the beginning of Rise is one of the best, like, sort of most masterful pieces of album sequencing. It's so dynamic. So one other thing about FFF that I forgot to mention is there are some really great, in the sparse, vast landscape of it, there are these really beautiful minimal keyboard breaks. Again, these gigantic sparse settings with great little details. And that is, again, for the one of my favorite musicians ever, and someday I will do lots of videos about these guys, but the Parliament Funkadelic genius, Bernie Worrell, part of the great songwriting trifecta with Bootsy Collins and George Clinton. So Bernie Worrell is on this. So this would have been, what, a year out or so from Stop Making Sense, his stuff on Stop Making Sense. So so that's another really cool detail. So anyway, so we get into the second song, Rise. Who is on this? So this song, excuse me, has the famous, I'm going to butcher this, I apologize, Ryuichi, I think it's Ryuichi Sakamoto from the Yellow Magic Orchestra, excuse me, on the Fairlight. And who else is on this? Is that it? That's it. Otherwise, everyone else that I've already mentioned. And so Rise is a complex song in that, first of all, it's part of it, what's so genius, is that it actually is a pop song and a popular song. So it succeeds on that front. But also, if you really listen to it and listen to the chiming rhythm guitar parts, it is it's like a very abstract folk song. And, you know, Lydon saying that he liked Japanese folk music. He also has talked about over the years his love of Turkish folk music and his love of stuff like Steel Eye Span. That's not for nothing. You hear all of that. And I think that this is the next development past some of the grains of some of what you hear on The Flowers of Romance, and even a little bit on excuse me, This Is What You Want, or some of the outtakes from that record as well. So, so this is an absolutely incredible song. Again, very circular, repetitive lyric, but that circular, repetitive lyric contains multitudes. When questioned about it, Lydon said that the song dealt with Northern Ireland and as well as South African torture techniques. Years later, Lydon specifically said that the song was about Nelson Mandela and what he had endured. There's all of that. There is sort of as Laswell had put it, the Irish folk thing with Lydon. And the drone, the magic of the drone is really what you have. And that's really the through line from what gets developed in Early Pill and on The Flowers of Romance, and then into this era. And the fact that Laswell had the skill to turn the sort of Irish folk drone and sort of what you would hear even like in bagpipes and stuff, the fact that he can turn that into, that he can shape it into this accessible sort of left field alternative hit is a testament to his skill, but it's also obviously a testament to Lydon. One of the things that really started post-82 with Lydon's vocals is using his vocals way up at the top of his register, almost sort of near falsetto. And that does bring in kind of, again, a sort of a droning, almost, again, bagpipe sort of sense of tonality. And this very emotional bleeding away. And so the lyrics, again, very sparse, but it's about the details. So they put a hot wire to my head because of things I did and said. And the other thing to note that is interesting is, so the song is called Rise, and it's dealing with very obliquely the troubles in Ireland and England, but then also dealing with apartheid in South Africa, without ever being didactic or explicit about it. I think it is a very humanist song. It's an anti-terrorism song, and in fact, tying in the Irish thing, the fact that the chorus is an echo of the Gaelic phrase of may the road rise and your enemies always be behind you. So so that I think that it is a very, very beautiful song. It's a sort of brilliantly, subtly political song. And the fact that it's called Rise, one thing I didn't know, and is apparently on the Wikipedia page, I had never I had never put all this together. I know the interview that they are referencing. The Sex Pistols, just as they were breaking up on their Lone American tour in 1978, gave a really curious interview. Sid and John gave a really curious interview that is almost like shocking in parts of its earnestness, because if you've ever heard any of the radio phone-in interviews they did, they were hilarious, but they were like the most sarcastic, oblique human beings on the planet at that point. I mean, if you thought Nirvana interviews were sarcastic and smart-assy, like, the Sex Pistols were 10 million leagues beyond that. But at one point, Sid talks about that they were working on a song about that. I don't know if he said that it was called Rise, but that they were working on a song about the blacks in South Africa rising up against the apartheid state and against their oppressors. And it gives one pause, because we know that John Lydon was working on the song Public Image while taking that bus trip across America on the tour that wound up breaking up the band. He also had presented the band at a sound check, or maybe they had started to try working on it. He had presented them the lyrics to Religion, which apparently the rest of the band was not really that into. They already had the song. A lot of people hate it. I don't hate it. Someday I will talk about it in depth. They already had Belson Was a Gas. You think about the riffs that Steve Jones had that wound up getting used on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle soundtrack, and if Lydon had, in fact, he's never confirmed it, written any of Rise and had maybe bits and bobs of Rise already happening, you can really marvel at the potential of what a second Sex Pistols album could have looked like, and what a whole new sort of repertoire from them could have entailed. It could have well and truly been fascinating and been another great creative leap for them, maybe. So anyway, the idea that Rise is maybe echoes back to that. I mean, the phrase alone, the flowers of romance, had been batted about for years by Lydon. So it's interesting to think about. I don't know how much actual depth there is to that, but it's interesting. But at any rate, the other thing, tying all of this together, is the line, and I will never forget, and as I have referenced many times, the 1992 Rolling Stone album guide took a very, very, very pissy view of the later Pill albums, and said that that Anger is an Energy comes off as an easy one-liner and not a statement of purpose. And I remember when I finally heard the song on here, I didn't know what in the hell they were talking about. So Anger is an Energy, it wound up being John Lydon's, the name of his second autobiography. And it is the main line of the song. It is the through line of the song. And what Lydon ties it back to, so speaking of systematic practices of altering behavior and manipulation, apparently when Lydon had meningitis as a child, he had completely lost his memory. He was in the hospital for a really long time. His memory had had completely been wiped. He did not recognize his parents. He was alone and in a terrible state of fear, didn't know who to trust. And apparently what the doctors advised his parents when he went home with these strangers was to attempt to make him angry, because anger could provoke memories. And the thinking was, I don't know how much cognitive study there had been on this, but apparently anger was a very good pathway to memory. And so they would provoke him into being angry, and anger was the energy with which he regained his memory and remembered who his parents were and the house and the apartment that he lived in, etc., etc. So the idea of anger as an energy, and then tying that into overcoming an oppressive force such as apartheid, that is infinitely more than an easy one-liner, dick brains, from the 1992 Rolling Stone album guide. Take that, motherfuckers. So and the other thing is, and I'm not exactly, George Remix. The remix phenomenon really kicked into gear when in my day back in the 90s, and I never really got into all that. I never really cared for all of that, for all of infinite remixes and lots of remix albums. I was never into that. But there was the 12-inch single mix was what was included on Greatest Hits So Far, which is where I first heard this song. And it was the Bob, so what's on here is the Bob Clearmountain mix. So it was the mix on the 12-inch single. And I never knew that Bob Clearmountain, I thought Bob Clearmountain, back in my day, pre-internet especially, was like a brand name, like Dolby. I didn't realize that Bob Clearmountain was like a guy who had worked on like nearly every record ever fucking made from the 80s onwards. I think one of his early things was the mixing of Tattoo You. And then it just went from there. Like, if you look on his website, it's almost like a fucking joke that one guy has worked on that many records. It is like one of the hardest working men in show business. It's insane. But anyway, Bob Clearmountain did the remix, and it tops this every time out as far as I'm concerned, because it foregrounds, as brilliant as the production is on Rise, and as brilliant as what Bill Laswell does, is he fades Lydon out and fades the track out at around the 6-minute mark. This foregrounds Lydon more, foregrounds the drums a little bit more, and it is about, 15, 20 seconds longer. The song comes to a screaming finish. It is one of John's best vocal performances, and it ending with the full force of the screaming, repeating, the chant, intensity of angers and energy, is extremely dramatic and extremely powerful. So the Bob Clearmountain is on the 2016 reissue, but normally I would never sort of point out that you should find some single remix, because I'm really not that person. But this is one of those times. I feel like it's a subtle thing, but it's really important. And if you've never heard the Bob Clearmountain mix, it's 6 minutes, 18 seconds, I want to say, and it's on here. Go fucking listen to it, because just giving Lydon that little more room makes the song that much more definitive, and again that much more powerful. So the fact that it ties the personal, the political, the oblique, the explicit, all of that together in this weird abstract pop folk thing is absolutely fucking magnificent. It is one of the absolute high points of the man's body of work. So yeah. Then the next song is Fishing. And Fishing is, we're back into the big whomping drums. Now, the drummer here, it's not Tony Williams. So Tony Williams plays on Rise. It's not Tony Williams. We now have Ginger Baker. Yes, Ginger Baker of Cream. Bill Laswell coaxed Ginger Baker out of retirement and got him to come and play on this. Now, the credits, there are no credits on the album, and it was always very mysterious as to who played what on this album. And Wikipedia breaks it down, so I'm just going off of Wikipedia on this. Ginger Baker even makes a joke in the Public Image is Rotten documentary that nobody knew who played what on this record, and people would think that he played on the Tony Williams songs, and then Tony Williams played on the Ginger Baker songs. And also apparently there was very serious talk that took place that the band would tour as Public Image Ltd. With a lineup of Bill Laswell on bass, Steve Vai on guitar, and Ginger Baker on drums with John on vocals. Can you fucking imagine the course of music history changing if those four men toured together as Public Image Ltd.? That is like one of the most surreal what-ifs of all time. So Fishing, I would imagine, is another sort of Martin Atkins, Malcolm McLaren, Steve Jones, Paul Cook, Keith Levine, see you later, motherfucker kind of song. It's certainly possible. It started off life as Pearls Before Swine. That's the other thing that Lydon does, is he uses a lot of little cliches and then stretches them out or sort of twists them. There's a lot of that on this record in the very minimal lyrics. And really just, again, it's again, really skillful, and just, it's interesting how smart all of that is, you know. So we again have Ryuichi Sakamoto on the Fairlight on this, and the other thing that I love about this is Lydon inverting the dopey. I've never liked the song. Barbara Streisand song, is it People? He inverts that and flips that on its head, and there is a sense of humor in here. You know, there is a weird sense of humor to this record, and again, just massive, big, empty, open spaces for these guys to run around in, and Vai throws in some wild shred guitar at the end that sounds like a malfunctioning computer. Just really interesting. Vai also does some really cool solos on Rise that are sort of undermixed slightly, and I almost hate to use this word, but I will. It has sort of a psychedelic shape-shifting effect. It isn't 80s guitar heroic stuff, you know? And if you listen to Vai's records, I mean, the one that I was the most familiar with was The Passion and the Warfare. You know that that's what he does, and he does interesting pieces of music. I haven't kept up super hard with his stuff, but I do check out what he's doing periodically. And, you know, the shred virtuoso shit really isn't more in service to his musical ideas and more in service to him as a, for lack of a better word, composer. So it's interesting that Vai is able to sort of pull out all these different sort of weird bending, twisting shapes, especially if he was just playing off the top of his head. It speaks volumes about him. And then we go into, and is this song one that, I forget if this is one that Tony Williams is on. No, this is Ginger Baker. So the next song is Round, and so this album, it obviously is very formalist, and so each side ends with these sort of definitive down tempo endings, and Round is and who else is, I forget who else is on this one. Let me check. So Bernie Worrell plays on this, which makes a lot of sense. And also on this is El Shankar. El Shankar is also on Rise, doing the violin parts. I can't believe I forgot to mention him. And Aib Dieng is playing percussion. Is playing pop drums. So Dreng and Ginger Baker sort of really fit perfectly together so that it almost sounds like, you know, it almost sounds like one sort of symbiotic drummer that is doing things that can't be done in reality because you can't play the percussion and the drum set at the same time. But it is a, you know, it's about nuclear war. There were a lot of nuclear war songs in the 80s, a lot of terrible nuclear war songs. This is a great one because, again, Lydon's clipped, oblique Western haiku, very, very sanded down lyrical style, works perfectly. The, you know, Laswell, I don't know, I can't imagine it's a tape loop, but the, again, circularity and repetitiveness of Lydon serving as his own sort of Greek choir. It's a menacing, ominous, again, sort of panoramic soundstage, and Lydon just fills all of that space. And then Vi comes in with these what would be sort of shred metal stuff, but it feels completely appropriate because it throws everything into the musical relief that is needed. Because otherwise there's, again, it is so ominous. And one of the other great things is towards the end of the song, it's about 4.5 minutes, and towards the end of the song, there's a beautiful moment of sort of organic music making where Ginger Baker and the percussionist sort of they speed up the tempo and they just sort of go off for a few minutes, and it's this great sort of moment, improvised moment that's just really, really beautiful and very, very organic, and an organic moment on a record that is so very heavily stylized and specific in its intention, that it's just a cool little moment where like you sort of glimpse what's on the other side of the door. And again, this could have been Tony Williams. I mean, it is funny, this, speaking of symbiotic, the symbiosis between Tony Williams to Ginger Baker. So, again, just a phenomenal song, a really powerful, dramatic ending to side one, and the fact that you've had this balance of tempos and moods, and as the dark counterpoint to Rise. Masterful stuff. Brilliant songwriting. And the fact that Lydon could write about nuclear war and Russian winter in such, again, an oblique but specific enough way that you feel it and you get the idea. Masterful. So then we flip the record over. And before I get into the songs, the one thing I did want to say is on the demos, how I had noted how repetitive it was and sort of more sort of drone based. Bill Laswell winds up having songwriting credits on a bulk of the songs. One of the things about Lydon, famously, is he always splits the publishing and with whoever contributes to the song. So Laswell really does deserve credit as, in terms of songwriting, I mean, I suppose you could call it arranging, but he really does theoretically give more chord shapes and probably arranging ideas to this material, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that. The other thing that is interesting about this album is, you know, Lydon has talked a few times about that with the sort of the super musicians coming on, that was a major boost to his self-esteem. As he put it, that people of that caliber would want to play with him or be associated with him was a very big deal. Which also leads into one of the oft repeated pieces of lore about this album, is that Miles Davis showed up and was playing or tried to play on one of the songs and told Lydon that he couldn't play because Lydon's vocals were going where his trumpet should go, and thus did not get recorded. Bill Laswell, many years later, claimed that it was in fact Ornette Coleman who did this. Obviously, Ornette Coleman, not a trumpet. I mean, Ornette Coleman and Miles Davis are two clearly very different human beings, and that somehow Lydon had confused them. Lydon has oft repeated the Miles Davis story. Bill Laswell insists that it's Ornette Coleman that this happened with, who said he couldn't find a way into playing. The book in here, I should show this off, right? The book in here. So that was the other thing with the packaging is, the single was single. I didn't mention that, huh? The CD was compact disc. So the book, and then we have, it's all very glossy. So art, and then thus photos of John Lydon. And then the coup de grace of the minimalist aesthetic of this album. And this is sort of my personal favorite, is you open up, oh come on now, open up, and you have, yes, poster. And I think that the tour t-shirts were just tour t-shirt. So anyway, but who knows whether it was either way, if it was Ornette Coleman or Miles Davis, that still would have been pretty amazing. Miles Davis, on one hand, Miles Davis makes more sense, and I would think that John would know who that was, because he's a very big fan, especially of Bitches Brew. But Ornette Coleman had worked with Bill Laswell, so that would also make sense that in the sort of cast of regulars that Ornette Coleman would stop by the power station. That's not at all outrageous to suggest. But in terms of, Lydon sort of being open to people, I mean, I think that one of the things that people forget is how much of a music lover he is. I mean, there was a Desert Island Discs thing. Well, there's famously one from the Sex Pistols days where he has a wide range of music, but he did one many years later that included some of his absolute favorite songs, and one of them was "Still Loving You" by the Scorpions, which him and his wife would, I guess, him and his wife Nora would share romantic feelings in regards to that song. So, the Monkees' Pleasant Valley Sunday was certainly one of my favorites. I think sometimes people don't sort of realize how omnivorous Lydon is in his music listening tastes, but just that the idea that the fact that Ginger Baker and Tony Williams and all of these other people are on this Reiichi Sakamoto, like the fact that these people would want to work with him was really emboldening to him, and really did a lot to bolster his self-esteem. And I think that, and that makes a lot of sense. But that sort of omnivorousness was echoed, and I forget if it was, this is the reunion pill years much later of the 2010s. I forget whether it was the press conference in China or in Russia. I want to say it might have been the one in Russia, where Lydon is talking about the histories of the reformed pill lineup, which has been remarkably stable over the years. And he points at himself and goes, "The Sex Pistols," and he points at Lou Edmonds, "The Damned," and he points at Bruce Smith, "The Pop Group," and then he points at Scott Firth and goes, "Add the Spice Girls." Because that was, Scott Firth had been the touring bassist for the Spice Girls. But he talks about like the importance of being open to not being a snob towards the guy who had been the bass player for the Spice Girls. And I think that, like I said, I think the anti-snob, all are welcome, let's see what you got vibe of this record and openness of this record, the fact that it was predated by working with Africa Bambaataa, I think that's what is so contagious about the spirit of this album. And when I talk about humanistic, things being expressed, I think that's a major part of it, and for all of the stunting around the Sex Pistols and whatever, I think one of the things that gets lost in that is Lydon was from the fucking projects. I mean, they didn't have hot water. I mean, his first job was beheading rats on the subway. I mean, you don't get more like working class. I mean, he was from the fucking projects. It's the equivalent of, you know, it's the equivalent of Wu-Tang Clan coming out of the Park Hill projects. I mean, it is the voice of the underclass. It is the voice of the voiceless, and that's what gave it. And then you have somebody who's that smart, who's considered a dumb shit kicker, and that's part of what gives it its power. That the force of articulation, and then informed by the anger of the indignities that he has seen. I mean, when he talks about God Save the Queen, he's like, you don't write a song like that because you hate the English people. You write a song like that because you love them and you're sick of them seeing them get stepped on. You know, so you know, I think that that's an important thing to note about him. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So the first song on side 2 is kind of like a weird mutant funk groove. It was the lone song not on this, and it's called Bags. And for years and years and years, I considered this a 6-song album. Bags was overwhelmingly my least favorite thing on it, and I would just, because it was the side opener, I just would skip it. And it wasn't until, so like I said, I saw Public Image Ltd. In 2010, and they performed this song. And the mutant funk song turned into like an insane, like from outer space fucking punk song that was like terrifying in its energy. I mean, it seemed damn near apocalyptic in its power. I mean, it seemed scary. It seemed like it could uncork the audience in dangerous ways. That's how powerful the music was. And I was like, well, Jesus, I've really got to... Because when they started playing it live, I was kind of like, oh, fuck, they're doing Bags. I don't really care for that song very much. And by the end of it, I was like, Jesus, I have to go home and listen to this again. I somehow have missed the greatness of this song. It is probably the most 80s sounding thing. What's funny is, and until I saw the formal credits on Wikipedia, I would have thought that this had the most classic Bernie Worrell in the 80s, like stuff, like something he would have come up with on like a George Clinton solo album, like R&B Skeletons in the Closet, or Some of My Best Friends Are Jokes, or You Shouldn't Have Bit Fish. It's like a very You Shouldn't Have Bit Fish kind of part. That is actually Sakamoto on the Fairlight. Bernie Worrell is not on this one, which I think is hysterical. But it is a weird mutant funk song. The backing vocals are, I believe, on this provided by future of extensive work with the Rolling Stones in the late 80s and beyond, Bernard Fowler. Bernard Fowler also is on Rise, on the chorus on Rise. He's the chorus in a way, and I neglected to mention him for that song. So, but it's a weird mutant funk song that I have really come to love, with again a droning repetitive chant of a chorus, and really strange. Probably if that's Vi on the rhythm guitar, Vi trying to play angular punk metal. It's odd parts, but it really works. It works in sort of a modernist architectural sort of way, if I can describe it like that. And then his actual solos are like fucking bananas solos. Like, there's some of the weirdest solos that he plays on the record. And I've really come to appreciate the charms and the strangeness of Bags. And it's kind of a perfect side opener. And, you know, if you're listening to this album straight through, it's a nice mood break after the kind of storm in the distance of Round. The next song has Tony Williams on drums. I want to note that at the off. The next song was a single, and that is Home. Home is, if you want to make a case for this being a metal album, or if you want to make a case for this having anything to do with metal at all, Home is where you're going to go. so Home is one of the most unbelievable songs on this record. First of all, the sort of shape-shifting guitar intro and shape-shifting multi-tracked choral effect of Lydon's clustered vocals, and just the sort of Greek chorus of doom refrain of better days will never be. And this is very much like the cousin to Fishing on side one. And whereas Fishing is more personal, this is definitely more political. It is the second nuclear war song. And again, there were a lot of terrible nuclear war songs in the 80s, whether it was very like Def Leppard's Gods of War, or whatever that piece of shit was by Sting of the What Will Mr. Gorbachev Do when Mr. Reagan, whatever the fuck that thing was. A lot of, again, a lot of garbage in that regard. But this is just such an absolutely ridiculously powerful song. And how do I put it? It is so, sort of the grief at the loss of the grief at the potential loss of human life. It is on a lot of levels a ridiculously powerful vocal performance. I mean, Lydon is just like singing his guts out, and when he comes to sort of the conclusion of "I don't believe anything," you believe him. It's a man at his wit's end. And kind of in the same way, the cousin to Fishing, Bernie Worrell is on this one. And again, you sort of have another open space for him to sort of come in, kind of how he does on Fishing. Whereas on FFF, he's a little bit more in the background, but still, still very important parts. And then you have Vi, who does kind of the most straight ahead metal riffing, the da 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 da. And I mean, like what you would think of on like an 80s metal record. But again, it's really, really satisfying, and it's for the song. And this sort of to me sounds like maybe the one song that he had worked out like parts for, because Jesus Christ, if he came up with this stuff off the top of his head, I can't even like that's like some sort of like master level improvisation that I have to imagine that he had worked out some of these parts in advance, or maybe they had let him hear the song a couple times. I don't know, but I mean, his guitar playing is absolutely phenomenal, and ratchets and pushes and pulls the grieving and the anger and the sadness and the pain of the vocal performance. And there is a part towards the end where, Laswell, Weiss, Skepolitis, if he's on this, and Tony Williams especially, lock into a combined pound that is like one of the it is one of the most like fucking rocking in like the best way possible fucking moments of the 80s. Like they coalesce and they sound like a band that has been they sound like not necessarily speed wise, but they sound like the fucking Bad Brains in that they sound like they've played hundreds of hours together and they are like completely locked in. It is a just fucking breathtaking moment of ensemble like oneness and fucking awesomeness and liveness. And again, on a record that is this like, again, weirdly stylized and very, very, very produced, just to have that sort of raw intensity from the band, it just punches through at you that much harder and is that much more moving. What it sounds like, between all of the different layered guitar parts and what Bernie Worrell is doing, and the fact that Lydon's voice is used to such great effect with the sort of the Greek chorus, and then the fucking intensity of what he's doing on the verses. What this really is, with that much rhythmic intensity and that many layered parts all weaving in and out of each other where it's damn near symphonic, this is the fucking sound of like of a fantasy version of what Led Zeppelin could have been in the 80s. Like, people talk about Led Zeppelin in the 80s, what if Bonham had survived? Like, this is what you, musically, this is what you wish they would have been doing, or what you wish they would have sounded like. And it's not for nothing, on the tour for this album, they wound up covering Kashmir. It's not for nothing. You hear it. You really hear it. It's, and that fucking end when Lydon goes into that final declamatory chant of, like, you know, you've just had all of these different parts happening and all of this intensity and, you know, and again, pushing and pulling happening. And Lydon just finally at the end coming straight through the center with the from lust to dust chant is just again, it is so fucking powerful and so empathetic, and you feel it along with him. And, you know, if anything, this is a direct, maybe not a direct, but it's a cousin to Marianne Faithfull's Broken English. It's the only other song about this sort of thing that has that level of reality to it. And Jesus Christ, does he pull it off, you know? And again, the weird subverting of cliche, you know, better days ahead. Like, it's fucking brilliant. It is a magnificent piece of work, and just a testament to the ridiculous display, the ridiculous amount of talent on display, and in a weird way, egolessness, because no one's showboating. You have guys who could do nothing but showboat, and none of them are. This is all for an amazing purpose. They are truly making music together. And as that fades away, we get into and I forgot my little thing of credits, so I'm just gonna. Or is it in the book? Can I be really, really, really slick? And we'll see if I can be slick. Here we go. So it is in the book. So we get to the final song, Ease. By the way, I will break down the songwriting since it's right here. So FFF winds up being Lydon and Laswell. Rise winds up being Lydon and Laswell. Fishing shares credit with Bruni and Schultz. Round shares credit with Schultz, as does Bags, as Bags should. Home is Laswell, and Ease, the next song, shares credit with Jebby Bruni. The one other thing I should say about before I get into the last song is there is sort of a weird funk influence on the original demos, and Bags is probably the only place where that funk influence shows up. So it's interesting how that largely goes away in the process of actually making the album. So anyway, so we get to the final song, Ease, the epic 8.5-minute closer of the album. It opens with, I would have to imagine that is Sakamoto on the Fairlight. I'm pretty sure Bernie Worrell is not on this, and it certainly sounds like it's a Fairlight. I want to say Malachi Favors is playing bass on this, but don't hold me to that. But on electric violin, we have El Shankar. On the, I don't know how to pronounce this, the Chatan or Catan, maybe, is Ibd Dieng. And, but then on the didgeridoo is Steve Tur, or Ture, I'm not sure. But this song, Ease, so first of all, on the demos disc, a little bit of Leiden wordplay. It starts off, the song is called Things in E. In other words, I would imagine in the key of E, and that it was just an improv. And Leiden segues that into Things at Ease. So the last song is called then Ease, which is really cool. And I love that. And I love Leiden. I love when Leiden just sort of plays with language like that and sort of twists language around like that. And he was doing that back in the Sex Pistols. I mean, Malcolm McLaren wanting a BDSM song about submission, dominance and submission, and like write a song about submission, so he turns it into Submission, a submarine mission. Like, I love Leiden's twisting of language. It's like one of my favorite things that he does. So anyway, so Ease begins with what I would imagine as a counterpoint between Sakamoto on the Fairlight and the Didgeridoo, and it goes on for a couple minutes, I want to say, and it's one of my favorite moments on the record. It sounds, like the world waking up, or the beginning of the earth turning. And in a perfect world, I looked for the DVD of it, and I'm not seeing it on the shelf, unfortunately. I know that I have it because I watched it not that long ago. In a perfect world, that would have been the score for the beginning of the movie Baraka. If you've ever seen Baraka, like, it's one of my favorite movies ever made. It's a fucking masterpiece. Like, holy fuck. On a side note, the first time I saw Baraka was by accident one night on cable. Like, I caught it like 5 minutes in, and I was just like flipping channels, and it was before the days of the channel guide, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I could not turn away from it. I was totally transfixed. So in a perfect world, the opening of Ease would be the opening of Baraka. I've always wished that those two things could get married. But it then sort of, and Ginger Baker plays on this, and Ginger Baker, oh my God almighty, like, this is like, so if Tony Williams, for any other drummer on the planet, what Tony Williams does on Home would be like the drum performance of a lifetime, okay? Well, if it were anybody other than Ginger fucking Baker, right, this would be the drum performance of a lifetime. It is absolutely fucking tremendous. This is a comparison maybe John Lydon wouldn't be super into, but it somehow splits the difference between the Beatles' The Inner Light, which I'm a very big fan of, or maybe the middle section of Within You, Without You, and some of the stuff on maybe In the Light, or some of the moments on Song Remains the Same, or the Rain song, into other things on Physical Graffiti. Like, it somehow splits the difference. And Prefigures, I mean, I love this song, but I don't think it's anywhere close as much as I love it. Like Head Down by Soundgarden. Like, this is such a vast, majestic fucking piece of music, and the layering of the guitars and what Vi is doing, and I would imagine Skepolitis just playing this beautiful, very like Eastern tonality of like, and these repeated droning notes, and then what you have, it sounds like a sitar, but it isn't. So there's not a sitar credited. So I don't know if that's the chatan or katan. I don't know. But and because that's sort of playing these beautiful counterpoints, and it's just this gigantic rolling piece of music that is, again, especially with that production sound, like that vast of a production sound. And then what you have over the top of that is, so again, Lydon, they're Laswell using Lydon's voice in these high clustered, stacked harmonies of himself, as again sort of this Greek chorus effect, and then the intensity of what Lydon is doing, like an atomic fucking bagpipe over the top of that. Just so powerful. I feel like I can picture him singing this stuff, like just like his guts coming out, and and again, ridiculously sparse lyrics, like ridiculously pared down lyrics. And I feel like, this album had been balancing sort of the personal and the political. And I feel like this is the point where it sort of brings it together. And it's the I don't know, the easily cowed or misplaced idealist at home watching the BBC, and they've hitched their wagons to whatever politician they think is going to be the answer for them or act in their interests. It is, it is just ridiculously fucking amazing. And out of that you have, and that's the other thing is the sort of the square root of all of that for me is, and part of what's so powerful, and what sort of ties all of it together is because I feel like Lydon really cuts to like the square root of a problem with people that a lot of people have, and especially people who sort of choose to, in one form or another, be in a psychological straitjacket or some sort of spiritual bondage, though I'm sure he wouldn't phrase it that way. But, what makes you happy, your misery, and I just feel like that is such a brutal, like, straight down the middle, like condensed version of one of the problems that we face as a fucking species, and one that is so cyclical. And maybe that's part of what goes round and round and round, right? And maybe the cyclical nature of all the other lyrics and song structures of this record, maybe that's what's at the center of that fucking, of all those circles within circles. I don't know. But Jesus Christ, it is fucking unbelievable. And it just sort of keeps coming at you. And, this song is 8.5 minutes. I listen to this song a lot of times. Like if I'm driving, like I listen to this song 3-4 times in a row. I get way, 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 way lost in it. I can just listen to it. I can truly just listen to it and sort of treat this one song like it's an album. There are certain singles in this world. I remember reading years ago, somebody said Public Enemy, like their peak albums were the equivalent of like 4 or 5 or 6 albums by anybody else. I feel like there are certain singles that can be albums. Like, do you know what I mean? Like it contains that much and you could just keep listening to it. And this song could be an album in a way. It's just, it's just so idiosyncratic and unique, and there's not really anything else like it in the world. And god damn what fucking Ginger Baker is doing, because it has a groove and swing and sort of like otherworldliness to it, and yeah, it's just it's just an otherworldly piece of music. And then we get to Mr. Vi, who really, as much as he has done some shred stuff and done some really cool musical things, this is where he's just totally let off the leash and he just goes fucking 80s Guitar Hero shred-tastic. You would think that it would be the stupidest place to go shredding, to go to Shredland on this unique, bizarre, rolling, almost Indian music, almost Turkish folk music, almost Irish folk music, but amplified and almost raga, almost like whirling dervish kind of music. Like it has all of these different tendrils in it. And the idea that of all places on the album, that this is when the Guitar Hero fucking goes nuts and really goes for it and starts burning up the fucking fretboard. But you need it, especially at the end of this album, and especially at the end of an album that, whether expressing political concerns or disappointments in people and whatever, and Lydon has sung so hard. You need the relief and just the relief and the release of what Vi is doing. But then what's really interesting is even after all the shredding, he starts to go into kind of weird atmospheric shapes with it and start, and just starts, I don't know, there's like crazy, like weird pitch bendy things that he's doing. And it's almost like he's sort of taken over the band in a weird way. But you still have goddamn Ginger fucking Baker, just unbelievable. For a guy who was so critical of John Bonham, this is like John Bonham incarnate, but it's Ginger Baker and playing like with such a sense of verve and groove, which is this is a weird place to groove, right? But Ginger Baker, being the goddamn genius that he was, figures it out, and then the whole album just fades out very quickly. It's a very like sudden, like they just sort of push the faders down very quickly as Vi is leaning on, I would imagine, like low E string and pushing down on the whammy bar, like, and the whole and though they're not doing tape manipulation or anything, the whole thing just all of a sudden feels like it's gone down like fucking 8 steps, and that's it. It's this very quick fade out, and that's the end of the record. And it's just it is an incredible masterpiece. And you look at Lydon's peers and colleagues from this time, and nobody was standing this tall. And this should have been over for him. It should have been over. Everybody had left, and he put some incredible people together and worked out an absolutely incredible masterpiece of an album, and an album that really, like I said, becomes I think the benchmark that a lot of other people didn't hit. So Lydon had a peculiar problem, and that was he now needed to tour, and it was probably highly untenable that there was going to be a touring lineup of Ginger Baker, Steve Vai, Bill Laswell, and John Lydon. Though again, holy shit, would that have been cool? So anyway, there is a Top of the Pops performance. I will find it and I will link it below. Because Rise winds up doing really well. Rise is like another hit. So for the second album in a row now, he produces like a kind of a left field alt rock hit. So the first was This Is Not a Love Song, and now he's got this business. So it's a little like the little engine that could. Like he's just sort of like putting one step in front of the other. So the Top of the Pops performance is hilarious because he doesn't have a band at that point. So he just sort of assembles some mates. So I forget who all else is in there, but Don Letts is on keyboards. And he would have been in Big Audio Dynamite or Big Audio Dynamite 2. I forget the comings and goings of that band. But so Don Letts is there, but Bruno from the Gang of Four is on drums, and I forget who. There are other people who are notable, and I'm just forgetting, so apologies. But on this, we have all of the different. So we have a couple. There's 2 mixes of World Destruction, which is cool, and there's lots of just versions of that song in general, but so the 2 here are perfectly good. There's the 12-inch mix and the industrial mix. So this has an alternative mix of things in E before it became E's, which is interesting. The Rise 7-inch, I'm not terribly interested in. If you really have fond memories of the 80s, God damn it, here's where you can get it. There's the instrumental mix of Rise. It's just Rise with John taken out. So if that's appealing to you, great. Home, the 7-inch edit of Home. I don't know why, with a song that dramatic and that much going on in it, you would want a 7-inch edit. But by golly, if you're just like, this song is too long, you're in luck if you want to seek this out. Then there is the Bob Clearmountain remix of Rise. So you can get it here. or you can get it here. So yeah, and that's the definitive version of Rise. I'm telling you, okay? I wouldn't jerk you around or waste your time. Trust me. Then we have two performances from the Old Grey Whistle Test from May of 1986. So, Lydon's manager, whose name I'm forgetting, assembled a new touring lineup for Public Image Ltd. So they could take this album and tour it around the world and march it forward to the people. And that lineup, which I've already sort of alluded to, but basically the manager assembled a post-punk supergroup. So you already have John Lydon, of course, Johnny Broughton, the legend. They got Alan Diaz, who had played with James Ulmer, and I forget who else, like other people who like are really notable, and I feel like a dope for forgetting. But I think he had played with a lot of jazz artists. So Alan Diaz, great bass player, cool guy. But then we have Lou Edmonds from primarily from The Damned. He plays on their second album, The Misunderstood, and far better than its reputation, Music for Pleasure. Bruce Smith, the drummer from one of the greatest post-punk bands of all time and future video subjects, The Pop Group. Unbelievable. So, and he was in the Slits. I don't remember if he plays on Cut or not. I think he might, but he plays on the second album, The Return of the Giant Slits, which, as much as I like Cut, and it deserves its status as a critic's favorite, and very influential, etc., Return of the Giant Slits I like even more. And the Slits eventually will be video subjects somewhere down the line. And then finally we have on guitar, or lead guitar, whatever, because Lou Edmonds also served as sort of a multi-instrumentalist in the band. But then we have the one and only John McKeoch, who had been the guitar player in Magazine, and then played on my personal favorite era of Susie and the Banshees records. So I think he joins on the third album, but then he's on Juju, so which is probably my favorite album of theirs, and he is there's a reason why when he passed away they called him the Jimmy Page of post-punk, and there is a weird Jimmy Page quality to him. And so the fact that they started covering Kashmir on this tour, again, not for nothing. Interesting that all of that comes together, that how unlikely that that a Led Zeppelin influence would become so prominent within the band. So anyway, so that's what's on this disc. But what we have... Oh, and the two Old Grey Whistle Test performances, that's right. They're good. They're very weirdly recorded. It is interesting to hear the band attempt to replicate the studio musicians, and not as well, just because they were a new band getting their footing. So no disrespect on that. It is very interesting, though, to hear Lou Edmonds and or McKeoch create their own guitar voices in the absence, especially of Steve Vai. Scapolite is stupid, definitely Steve Vai. So because those two things are worlds apart. But then we have this show, from a week later, we have the Brixton Academy show, and this show is very grainy video is featured in the. Which I will link because apparently it's on YouTube. The Public Image is Rotten documentary. This was sort of the kind of homecoming return gig of Pill. The new lineup. Here we are. Here's what we do. And apparently the crowd was a lot of disgruntled young punk sort of, I don't want to say posers, but I guess we'll say posers who were, spitting and pissed off. And those people are that's a very strange lot, because there were even a few of them still hanging around when I saw them in 2010. And what's weird is they're always 22. They always look the same. So if you look at old videos, look at old footage, they always look exactly the same. So, this doof had the mohawk, that was this tall, and a Bad Religion patch on a jean jacket. I mean, it was totally picture a cliched punk, like the punks that would be on like postcards at Heathrow would be, or so at any rate, I don't know that that's what the people at this gig looked like, but I get the sense that that's exactly what they were. Lydon absolutely fucking excoriates them, dresses them down as only he can. It is interesting to compare this to the Sex Pistols' Live at Chelmsford Top Security Prison release, because that is Lydon, a young Johnny Rotten, goading. I mean, how old was he at that point? 19 or something? Goading these prisoners and like calling them a load of tossers and whatever. This is different. These are just people being absurd. And this has some of the intensity and sort of kind of like the Devo, that show that's on Live the Mongoloid Years, or the Suicide 23 Minutes Over Belgium, or whatever that is, or the Stooges Metallic KO. There's that similar sense of like impending doom sort of hanging over everything. But unlike all those shows, Pill actually carries on and actually comes back and performs 2 more songs after Lydon dresses them down as only he can. So they do open with Kashmir on this. There's later on the songs from the Heart box set, there is the studio version of Kashmir, which I guess they never fully finished, but it is here. It's like an intro piece. It's like a minute and a half. And then there's FFF, Low Life, Fishing, and those are all well and good. The band is a little more sort of sprightly. They're not really like rocking. Or have the savage intensity of the early version, the Keith Levine wobble version of Pill Mark I, if you will. But then they start getting into a really, really interesting area where I think they really mark out their own territory. And that is when it starts getting into Banging the Door from Flowers of Romance, which they totally rearrange, and this is just the product of these guys. And it's striking in its originality and how amazing it is. It sucks the crowd so absurd because the band like is fantastic, and you just want to hear them play, and hear them do what they do. And then like we get into Flowers of Romance, Bags, Round, Home, like that sort of stretch. So Banging the Door, Flowers of Romance, Bags, Round, that stuff is absolutely magnificent, because there's a lot of improvisation. There's a lot of, there's just a lot of interplay, very free and sort of an easy sense of interplay and just musical creation. And you could hear that this band is sort of finding its footing and really enjoying playing together. And Lydon talks about that in this era, that he talks about having intense volume earlier on in Pill and in the Sex Pistols. And he talks about that at some point you find that you don't need as much volume, because you find that you really like what you're doing and you really want to hear it properly and really bring it to people properly. And so the wall of noise becomes less appealing, and you want to bring out subtleties and idiosyncrasies. And you can hear those things happening despite the totally insane audience, and Lydon's having to tell them to behave, basically, and act like, act like animals. So at the zoo. So it's a really, really interesting recording. And then, we'll get into that lineup later when I eventually do the Public Image Ltd Polka Dots and Dreadlocks era. That's my copyright. All right, don't touch that one. So at any rate, I think that just about wraps things up here. Wraps up things here, yes. I can speak the words, yes. Okay, so anyway, I will be back, I guess, next week with another exciting video, another one-off, but you don't know what it is, so you're just going to have to wait. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this. This has been fun to do, and kind of jumping into Public Image Ltd world. There's a long way to go as coming, coming eventually. So at any rate, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. And please like and comment and subscribe and all of the different YouTube things. So at any rate, yeah, I will be back next week with another exciting video. So I'll see you all very soon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!